Hey, everybody. So long after the United States men are done playing and you thought the drama was over, there's still drama going on with U.S. men's national team. We're going to cover all of that as well as talk about the semifinals because it's never over here. We are headed into extra time. That was a terrible intro, but we're doing it anyway. We are headed into extra time. Let's make it happen. All right, Chris. So U.S. men have been out of the World Cup for a little while now, and the dust had settled, the coast looked clear, and the coast is not clear. And for anybody who hasn't been listening, I will give you the short rundown, and then I will turn over to Chris for his opinion. So, before the World Cup, there are obviously some rumors of a specific player who wasn't getting along with the coach. Everybody was really bashing the coach at the time. The World Cup's now over. People were upset that certain players didn't get as much playing time. And Greg Berhalter gets invited to some leadership summit and decides to talk about one specific player who he did not mention by name, who caused a big rift. And the situation was so bad because of their attitude and poor work ethic that they almost sent them home, which, if you read a bunch of articles, it really hasn't happened outside of like players doing drugs, getting caught in strip clubs, or just flat out breaking the law. And everybody speculated that it was Giovanni Reyna, Eric Winalda, and MLSsoccer.com, and I think The Atlantic all reported that it was Giovanni Reyna. And Gio didn't want to leave it alone, comes out, makes a statement, Twitter and Instagram, basically saying, hey, I'm a pretty stand-up dude, but yeah, there was some stuff going on, and like I felt like I left it all out there, but I apologize for anything I might have caused, yada, yada, yada. Since then, lots of people have covered it. Lots of people have bashed Reyna. They've bashed Greg Berhalter. They've bashed the men's team. They've bashed Borussia Dortmund. Borussia Dortmund's come out and said, hey, this is a stand-up dude. We really like this guy. That was not a very short synopsis, but it's the synopsis. You can check out more of the articles that I'm going to post down in the comments or the description here. So, all of that being said, Chris, what do you make of all of this? You've been a big Reyna supporter this whole time. What do you make of it?
Oh, really? I'm just pretty disappointed all the way around. Um, if we can piece together what has been said by different parties, whatever, it seems like Greg, when they showed up camp in Qatar, Gio aside, knows exactly what he said. But the gist of it was like, A, you're not going to play as much as you probably think you should. No, I'm thinking Greg was, just trying to get him prepared for that reality. I would say you'll probably heard it as, hey, not going to get much time out there. And first of all, as a coach, don't know why you say it that way.
Are you talking these initial comments to the player?
Yeah,
This is
not any of the aftermath. This is, before the World Cup games begin. Why do you go to one of your best players, who you know is one of your best players, who maybe you're a little unsure of his attitude? I mean, I can speak to this as a high school coach, teaching 18-year-old boys who some of them had real bad attitudes. You have to be so careful about how you speak to them. Teenage, 20 years old is not exactly out of teenage years. Teenage boys have such fragile egos. Obviously they're cocky and is in a way to cover up that insecurity of who they are. And here you're telling a guy who, from his experience, believes that he is one of the best up-and-coming players in the pool. Has been on a rise at Dortmund. You've talked about him publicly being, one of the players that you hope to be able to rely on in the future. Fine with the personnel decisions that Greg made. Obviously, Pulisic and Weah were great on the wings. There's no problem with them starting. There's no problem with Aronson being the first one off the bench, especially because he was going into that central role. My question to Greg is, you don't know how much you might actually need like that. Say, he's going into the tournament and he knows he's got Pulisic and Weah as his top wingers. Great. Don't tell the guy who's right behind them, hey, you're not going to get much playing time. You tell that guy, hey, look, you guys have really shown their capabilities. I'm going to put them out there. I know that you're really good too. And if anything happens to either of these guys, or we need something different, you're going to be my guy there to go in. And that's the way you tell him, hey, you're not starting.
Right.
You're not going to be our go-to guy. We recognize your skill. And we recognize your potential. We want you to be a part. And, obviously through the games, I don't think it really made that much of a difference to the outcomes of the games, except I would say the England game. People have made the argument we would have finished the same way. We'll get to that in just a second. But that conversation, a 20-year-old boy, on. How did you expect him to react? If he was 24, 25, yes, I would expect him to be able to be a man and say, okay, because this is also something, you and I growing up had, JV tryouts, varsity tryouts. I tried out for JV when I was in 7th grade. I didn't make it, which I shouldn't have. I was a 7th grader. But that was a lesson learned for me of how to deal with that rejection and working harder and trying to come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that when I was 13. This is a guy who has been playing the highest level, way above his age for his entire life.
Right.
Hasn't had to face that yet. He hasn't had to learn that yet. And so now you pick the World Cup to be the place to try to teach him how to deal with that. And obviously that probably was not Greg's goal. But Greg has to realize, he hasn't dealt with this before. This is a terrible way to start that conversation. Because what if 15 minutes into the Wales game, Tim Weah, breaks his ankle? You need a guy to step up and fill that role.
Right.
Well, look, you have
the last
a perfect
cycle that
one
we
on
were
the
in,
bench.
Altidore blew his hamstring out almost immediately. He didn't see any minutes.
You got the perfect guy on the bench, and
right.
Instead of building him up to make sure that he's ready to play, told him he wasn't going to have an opportunity. So he's there saying, why am I here? Should I care? So that initial part of it, don't understand why Greg would do that.
Right.
Do you have any comments on that part of it?
Well, so
keep going.
So that's a lot, right? So hopefully for everybody who's listening, now you're seeing the bigger picture unfolding, right? And there's a lot of stuff to unpackage here, right? There's Greg initially, there's Gio initially, there's Gio before all of this, right? There's looking at the rest of the roster, there's the post stuff. So let's start to take this piece by piece. We'll kind of start where you just were, right? So let's look at Gio before the World Cup goes in, right? And not his personality, not his attitude, not any of those things. Let's just look at Gio as a player, right? He's got a lot of talent. He's making a lot of waves for Borussia Dortmund, right? This is a club that has built up players from the U.S. team before, Pulisic immediately before Reina. And he's building this big talent, but he's struggling with injuries, right? He doesn't play a lot for us through qualifying. He tries to make a couple comebacks at Borussia Dortmund, playing limited minutes. Lots of pictures of him in tears, very frustrating and heartbreaking for the United States team. You know more about this than me, but I believe there was one of the pools that he wasn't selected for, and I want to say his dad chirped in and made comments. Somebody chirped in. No, that was Pulisic. Pulisic's dad was bashing people. My apologies. But like there was backlash from the media and from alternative presses with Gio moving through all of these various things, right? Now to make an
There was
appropriate
lots of scrutiny
correct.
both ways. Yeah.
Making an appropriate comment about his dad. His dad's Claudio Reyna. It's kind of a big deal, right? He was a great player for the US team. So it's not without, it's within reason to believe that Gio's got a lot of people in his ear saying, "Hey, don't worry about it, man. Like, you're going to get a shot. Like, just get healthy. Just get healthy, you'll get a shot. Just get healthy and get a shot," right?
And I'm sure that was his mindset. Yeah, is if I work back to get healthy, I will be in this thing.
Yeah. And so now here we are. We're arriving at the World Cup. We've seen the roster, okay? And this is, again, we're still backed up. This is before we find out the tactics, before we find out the formation, before any of that, right? We could assume that we were going to play the 4-3-3. It's probably a safe bet that Pulisic and Weah were going to play out on the right. And Aronson was in pretty stellar form at the time. But Aronson's listed on the roster as a winger. So it's not, again, it's within reason that Reyna would believe he's the first winger off the bench. You're not bringing in Jordan Morris. Paul Arriola didn't make it. Christian Roldan's just there for leadership, right? So if you know Aronson's going in your midfield, there's a really strong chance that Reyna believes if I just get everything together, when Weah comes off the field, I'm at least bagging 15 to 25 minutes a game, and I got to be ready to make an impact, right? That lines up with his injuries. That lines up with his spot on the depth chart. It lines up with lots of things.
We all saw that going in. Obviously, he's going to come to those same conclusions.
Correct. And touching on something that you had said before, as a manager, I think you're dead on the money. The way that you approach that, and we see it in lots of other sports, right? Coaches get interviewed, right? Like the NHL coach is there and the media's ripping them and they're like, "Hey, like why so-and-so on the third line or the fourth line? Like they're like, whoa, they're such a great player and whatever." And they're trying to ask that loaded question to get the coach to say something ridiculous or get the player fired up. And they always get the response of, they're a really quality player, and I just keep telling them, I need you ready when you have your chance, because your chance is going to come, and I need people I can count on. And that should have been the message from Greg, right? Like, hey,
absolutely,
you're not going to be shocked that you're not starting, right? But I don't know when I'm going to need a weapon like you, and if we go down to Wales, maybe I'm bringing you in, right? If we go down to England, maybe I'm bringing you in. If we're up, maybe if we're struggling in the Iran game, so be ready, stay healthy, stay fit. All of those things, right? But that's from our understanding, that's not the message he gets. The message that he gets, and I'm sure it wasn't just him either, right? There were probably other players on the team that got the whole like, "Hey, buddy, you might not play at all." What I just had, and Aaron Long was probably told like, "Dude, Tim Ream, I brought Tim Ream. Read between the lines. You're not going to get a lot of playing time." I think the difference here is Giovanni Reyna has all the media hype, right? This guy right here. This little device, you and I didn't have that when we were playing, right? Nobody was tweeting about us. Nobody was on Facebook like that, right? So Reyna knows what's going on. Reyna's seeing the media hype. He's seeing whatever. And when you immerse yourself and surround yourself in that, you start to believe it's true. And I'm not saying Reyna's not a quality player at all. But now Reyna's falling into this mindset of, I might be starting, right? Weah was struggling with the same injuries that I'm struggling with. I'm in form. Weah's kind of in form, right? Like there's a chance. And then Greg hits him with this bash. And to go off a second point you said that I agree with, these are just kids, right? Like I get he's
especially
playing
this team,
right? I get he's playing professionally for Borussia Dortmund. I remember myself when I was 20 years old. If I'd busted my butt my whole life, made the World Cup, got off the plane, was so fired up because it's the World Cup, man. Like this is your dream. You literally thought about this as a kid. You might break your leg a year from now and never play another World Cup again. And to be met with that message that, hey, you're just kind of like you're a tourist, right? Like you're just kind of here for the ride, right? So like just don't get in the way, all right? Because the big boys got to take care of business and you can't be a distraction, right? I'm not saying he should have done what he did, but I'm saying it's not.
Can understand his reaction.
Correct. I'm not baffled that he was ticked off and he was pouting and he was doing whatever. Do I think it's professional? No. Do I think it hurts his character? Yes. But I'm not shocked by any of those things. Right?
Well, of course not.
So still staying before, right? With the plane has arrived. We haven't played a single game yet. Are there any other thoughts that you had? I kind of, jumped in to add my 2 cents.
Um,
All seem fair. Everything I
no,
said.
I mean, no, I think that part, like you said, it's very understandable that he responds that way. He should have somebody teaching him that that's not the way you respond. And I do think, from the way Greg described it in, his symposium, the quotes from that, I do actually feel like the team and the coaches did a pretty good job of handling that, and turning it around. And that a lot of that is the way I would have done it.
But I asked you, I beg this question. Do we believe I think that's the question now, right? The question is, do we believe that it happened the way Greg said it did? Or do we believe that Greg said something and that might not be all of it? Because Greg's statement, and you can find it, I'll link it in the description, was that the team and the coaching staff basically had an intervention with this player, and he apologized to the team, to the group that he was a part of. But if he hadn't done those things, and if the group hadn't been able to come to a resolution, then the group would have dismissed this player, which leads you to believe that it wasn't just Greg and like the assistant coaches bringing Reyna into the locker room and saying, hey, buddy, knock it off. Your attitude's terrible. We're going to put you on a plane out of here. It makes you believe that Greg asked Gio to stay after a training session, and like Roldan and Pulisic and Adams and McKinney and Ream and the coaches were all kind of there saying like, hey man, like this is a bit, you know what I mean? Like and I don't know if I buy that. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying I buy that.
Say, and again, this is from having been a coach. I would say it happened in stages, because if this was me as a coach, my first thing would be just me, the coach, or even, if I have an assistant coach that maybe has a pretty good relationship with him on the team, have that coach go talk to him first, and him out, see how he's doing, see why he's behaving this way, which you didn't know why he was behaving that way. You're out of your mind. But still have that assistant coach who has a good relationship with him try to break through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that doesn't work. He doesn't respond. Okay, then probably after that, I go to my captains. Tyler Adams, like you said, probably Ream, those leader guys. Hey, do you guys want to talk to him and see if you can get him, straightened out?
Right.
And they go and talk to him. Okay, he doesn't respond very well to that.
Right. Well, and there's also a
Me as the
chance that this sort
coach,
of happened in that reverse order, that Greg and his coaching staff, while watching a training session, are watching a player like Adams or a player like Pulisic or a player like Ream, like trying to like get Reyna up, or like ragging him about something, or like they're noticing that dynamic and they're like,
yeah,
hey, what do you
definitely.
think? What do you think that's about? Right? Like, and then going to Ream afterwards, hey, like, is everything all right? Like, I saw you pull Gio aside and like chat with him, and then maybe Ream says like, I'm pretty frustrated, coach. Like, we're out here busting our butt, and like he's just whacking the ball over the goal and laughing at me. Like something typically like a 20-year-old would
Yeah.
do, right? You get in a shooting drill and he's not really trying to hit the frame, and he's just kind of a joke to him because he's like, what does it matter if I take this drill seriously? I'm not going to play anyway, right? And like all you got to do is have that attitude for like an hour of a 2-hour
Your
training
team
session.
hates you.
Right, exactly. Especially at this level, right? Like
Yeah,
I mean, in
absolutely.
high school, maybe it took a couple weeks, but like in high school, you could just be like, you're not going to play anyway. Like, see you later. This is so different to be like,
Yeah.
I can't even, like, you can't even be here right now because it's not funny to me and you're disrupting my mental game, and I'm, freaking out trying to bring everything.
So, and anyways, what I would say is that probably everything that Greg described happened probably did happen, but, mixed up in different stages, and eventually it got to the point of, that team meeting of like, hey man, really need you to get to be a part of this, or you can't be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I played college soccer, and we started out with a pretty poor season. There was tensions building, conflicts bubbled up. We had a team meeting, and the coach was there. A lot of what was spoken was from the players, and it was, certain players apologizing, other players calling out, behaviors, and that was the college team, which again, it was 19 to 22-year-olds, which is where we were with this team. So I think it's a normal thing for this to happen. Um, Again, they're professionals, so there's a lot more scrutiny there.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Um, how how does this compare to the Weston McKennie incident? Right. And so going back, if you don't remember, Weston McKennie, when the men's team were in the Columbus area, uh, he broke team protocol. This was during the pandemic, and had guests who weren't allowed to be there over in the hotel. And Greg suspended him. Right. To
Send them home,
me, to
send it back.
me, it sends the same message of like, I don't care who you are, right? Like the rules are the rules. But I also don't remember so much media hype about it, and maybe it's because I didn't pay attention enough, but like I just don't remember this feel. Like as a coach, is this on par for you? Is this too much? Is this, like give me your opinion on that.
Um, Kenny thing I think is different because it was a very public thing. Like people knew almost as soon as it happened that McKenny had broken protocol. This was something I think that Greg had to do, and it is different because McKenny is an established starter. Like he's been there, he is one of the guys on the team, and so yes, this is Greg setting a precedent of it doesn't matter who you are, team, and the team comes first, and you need to fall in line with that. I'm fine. I'm fine with what happened there. And I do remember there was a pretty good up when people initially learned that McKenny had been sent home. Then, like once the details came through and it kind of got explained what happened, most everybody was like, well, yeah, that makes sense because at the time we're all following different pandemic protocols in our own jobs, and it was
Right.
like, yeah, I've got these rules at my job. If I don't follow them, I'm gonna get sent home and not get paid. So you got to do the same thing. Just because you're a professional soccer player, change that.
Right. Doesn't excuse anything. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And McKinney was also, I also remember this being like super early on where like we knew McKinney was one of our better players, but we didn't quite understand the caliber that he was going to be participating at. And he was still kind of on the rise at Juventus. Just to go back to the Gio thing, I'll just read a couple quotes just so everybody can kind of see where Chris and I are coming from. I know it's linked down below, but Greg said in a leadership summit on Tuesday, okay, and I'm going to read these and then I want to talk about Greg in this specific instance, okay? So that's where my brain's going to go. That he was considering sending a player home from the 2020 World Cup because the player, quote, was clearly not meeting expectations on and off the field. According to multiple reports, first by MLS Soccer's Bogart, the player was Gio Reyna. Reyna was expected to be a key contributor off the bench, but he only played 8 group stage minutes. Okay, so we keep going. According to a lightly edited transcript published by the Charter newsletter, they said, quote, as a staff, the U.S. men's team, we sat together for hours deliberating what we were going to do with this player. We were ready to book a plane ticket home. That's how extreme it was. Berhalter said that both he and the team's leadership group, a half dozen experienced players, okay, so that's a lot of members of the team, right? And players, including Captain Tyler Adams, were prepared to send the player home. So we have Greg's coaching staff deliberating what we're going to do. They obviously inquire as to how the team feels, which I can appreciate, right? Because it's just
Definitely.
as much their team as it is my team. And you're looking at 6, right? Which is about the number of players that we were mentioning, right? You think about the guys you'd have in leadership, in Roldan, in Ream, in Zimmerman, in Adams, in Pulisic, maybe McKinney, right? And according to this, right, according to what Greg is saying, they were also prepared to send him home. But the player voluntarily apologized to the group, and Greg said, and I quote, and from that day on, there were no issues with this player. So now we have this comment comes out, right? all of this turmoil coming up and all this dust getting kicked up, okay? The good news is none of this happened during the World Cup when these events unfolded, okay? The question that I have for you is, okay, and this is my concern. I'm looking at Greg, and the only question I have is, why talk about this at all? Why even bring this up? If it's resolved, like you said it was, and the player apologized to you, then move on. Because as soon as you make this unprompted statement of like, hey, I got a cool example of a time where I was an amazing leader, we had to resolve this big problem when we did this thing, you immediately open the door to some people going, did you just try to beat him to the punch? And were you worried that Gio was going to say something and make you look bad, so you jumped in and did it? What are your thoughts?
I'm honestly, just from what I have seen of Greg, I know of him and his interactions with media. I'm gonna say that he probably was naive enough to really believe that it was a confidential, off the record presentation. Because that's what he said he had been told, is that it was going to be off the record. And I've been a part, obviously much smaller levels, but I've been a part of leadership seminars and talks and that sort of thing. And it makes sense if you are the presenter for something like this, you can reach to your unique experiences, your unique things that maybe set you apart. Obviously, if this is a huge leadership summit like this is, going to be talking to people who are already in high leadership positions. So they have all faced lots of leadership challenges already. At he doesn't really want to speak to that because those are things that they've already overcome, they've already learned from. He's going to reach to his one big leadership experience, and find something as an example. So in that, I can understand why Greg said it. I can understand why that was the example he chose. I really do believe he would be naive enough to say, like, I can say this here because these people are here for this summit and they're not going to take this and run with it.
Yeah, I can see that. I definitely can agree from some of the other stuff that Greg has said.
I don't have a lot of fault. I don't have a lot of fault with his intentions. It was a terrible mistake because how could you be dumb enough to really believe that these people aren't going to, first of all, they know, probably a lot of them there saw what happened at the World Cup. Probably even while they were sitting there listening to him talk about it, some of them were like, talking about Gia? No. Oh yeah, I'm sure he's talking about Reina. Like,
right.
Obviously
they're sending their tweets out, they're sending their text messages out, they're getting the rumor mill started.
They were going to figure that part out. You can be as anonymous as you want to. It was obvious. So that's my thing is, how can you be dumb enough to really think that they're not going to make a big deal out of it?
Right. And when you look at other coaches and the way other coaches get interviewed, as my cat hurls onto this chair, my dog's going to fight her too, so this will be a fun. Hopefully you still pay attention to the podcast, but if not, this will be entertaining. The other thing that these other coaches have is they have that experience, right? So to me, this was another area where Greg's lack of class and experience just continued to shine through, right? Like, we obviously had a tactics issue. We had a lot of management issue, but this is unfortunately not the first time that Greg has gotten in front of the camera and just said stuff that was like really dumb, right? So I remember when we were looking at like initial rosters and we're in qualifying and we're trying to figure out what guys are going to go to what camp. And one of the reporters asked a question to Greg. This is when they're doing like the virtual ones, right? So like you had to get a Zoom link to go to this. So these are like handpicked by USA Soccer. There is nobody in here that is not asking a question they're not prepared for. And everybody just berates him about the European players, right? This is before Greg had solidified any of them. And they started asking about how are you going to feel knowing that the Premier League players are in their off season, but the MLS players are in their in season, right? Or preseason is where that EPL players were. And Greg basically makes this whole comment very blatantly. You can hear it, dude. You can just hear them. They're just going crazy. Hey, Oggs, knock it off. Knock it off. Go get a toy. Look, right here. If I get rid of this cat, that'll help a little bit. Yeah, just get rid of the cat. Greg basically makes this comment that says, like, yeah, none of the EPL players are as fit as the MLS guys are because the MLS guys are playing super hard. And the media, like, presses it, and they're like, did he just allude to that? So they're like, what about Brendan Aronson? Like, Brendan Aronson's, like, a workhorse, and he's kind of like, I don't know. Like, Brendan Aronson's probably not as fit as the MLS guys. Like, and it was just, like, a series of, like, just stupid stuff that was flying out of his mouth, and he was literally just naming players. Like, Aronson was only one of the players that he named, and just going down the list, like, a laundry list of just, like, here's the reasons why none of these guys are good enough to play on my team, and you just sat there like, this guy's our coach? Like, all of the guys in Europe are infinitely better and more fit than the guys that were playing the MLS. Like, what in the world? I think, like, Zimmerman was the one guy we had that you were like, okay, like, he probably should be right. And I know Miles Robinson's playing for Atlanta, but you started to look at the rest of it and you were like, what wingers are we going to play? You're really telling me Paul Arriola and Jesus Ferreira for FC Dallas are going to be better than Brendan Aronson and Reyna overseas? Like, and Pulisic? No, there's no chance, right? And it like, he's done that time and time again. So the frustration for me was that, like, here we are again. Here we are with, like, Greg being Greg and thinking everybody only cares about him and he's the team. And so I'm gonna be like, yeah, you guys should really appreciate this thing that I did because this guy was being a jackwagon and I almost sent him home. You're welcome. And, like, that's not the response he got. The response that he got was like, Gio? Of all the people, really? Like, I guess I can kind of see that, but, like, it was that bad? Really? Was it that bad? And now we got, like, Instagram posts blowing up, and we got, like, Reyna making his comments, and it's like, you didn't need to say any of those things, right? And I can understand if they, oh, it's going to be closed and everything's off the record. But, like, dude, use your brain. Have some class, right? Like, Gareth Southgate doesn't do that
and
stuff.
This is the kind of thing.
Louis Van Gaal didn't do that stuff.
Thing
like,
you could use it in a story, 5 or 6 years from now. Sure. A week after you leave the tournament.
Right. Like, I don't know. I just don't understand. So anyway, Greg, let's see. Plane ticket home. That's how extreme it was. Furthering the quotes, it said what it came down to was we're going to have one more conversation with him, and part of the conversation was how we're going to behave from here on out, right? So, like, to me, it's not even just the fact that you said it. It's, like, the way that you said it, right? Like, we're going to behave? You told a 19-year-old? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't have looked at him and said, like, we're gonna think about how to behave. I would have said, like, we had one more conversation about, like, work ethic and training tactics. But anyway,
even just expectations.
And then he said the other thing. They said there aren't going to be any more infractions, but the other thing that we said to him was, so now here's a different kind of a quote, because this is Greg saying that we said this to him, you're going to have to apologize to the group. But it's going to have to say why you're apologizing. It's going to have to go deeper than, guys, I'm sorry. And I prepped the leadership group with this. I said, okay, this guy's going to apologize to you in the group, to the whole team. Okay, so we're getting lots of different quotes all over the place, right? But now this side of it is really, hey, Reyna didn't do it of his own accord. Greg basically said, like, hey, I want you to make a sincere apology. These guys are sending you home. Lo and behold, you get an apology because Reyna's not an idiot. He's going to, do the thing. So Reyna makes a statement, I was trying not to comment on this. It's my belief that things happened in a team setting that ought to remain private, right? That being said, statements have been made that have reflected my professionalism, my personal character, so I'm making a statement. Greg told me my role would be limited. I was devastated, just like you had said. He's someone who plays with pride and passion. He's got all these abilities. He's very emotional, and he acknowledges he let his emotions get the best of him, affect his training, behavior, all that stuff. He apologized to his teammates and his coaches. He shook off the disappointment. And then he says, which this I can agree with, right? And that's, I guess it might not be the lens that you felt like we were trying to approach this from, but it is the lens that I wanted to approach this podcast episode on, which is I'm disappointed that there is continuing coverage of this matter. And this is something I can agree with wholeheartedly with Gio. I'm really disappointed that Greg made this statement in the first place and that the media chose to pick up on it, and that now we're in this situation because we know Gio's going to be a key member of this team going forward. And we also know that there's a chance that Greg is going to get offered, because they're already in negotiations with him, another 4-year cycle. Okay? You can't start this with one of your up-and-coming wingers, one of your better players, who the coach is like already got a grudge with. Because, and I'm not saying I agree or disagree with the following statement, John Brooks had a disagreement with him. I don't think John Brooks was good enough to make the team. That's my 2 cents. But there are a lot of people who thought he was, and he never even got a look. And John Brooks isn't the only player that Greg has publicly said or hinted at he just doesn't get along with or doesn't fit into the mold. Giovanni Reyna can't be one of those players, right? Gio continues to say, Coach Berhalter has always said that issues that arise within the team will stay in-house so we can focus on team unity and progress. Okay, I love my team. I love representing my country. I'm focused on improving. I'm, super focused on what is the best interest of the men's national team so we can enjoy great success in 2026. Borussia Dortmund comes out and says, like, yeah, Giovanni Reyna is a stand-up dude. We've never had any problems with him. That whole statement you can basically just forget you heard, because if I'm the owner of a club that's about to sell this player for millions of dollars, I'm also saying he's pretty awesome, because the last thing that I want is anybody to be like, I don't know if I want to buy that guy anymore because I heard he acted like a real clown, right? Like, you don't need a Cristiano Ronaldo situation. So, kind of bringing this whole thing, wrapping it up, because I know we want to talk about semifinals, right? My final thoughts, my full statement, and I'll pass it over to you, is, yes, I'm disappointed if this is the way that Reyna chose to conduct himself, but I understand that he's a 19-year-old kid. And if Greg and the team did what they said they did in the statement, then they handled it, and there was no reason to bring it up and talk about it, right? I'm disappointed with Greg making this statement in that manner. Greg could have talked about the same scenario, and he could have said, there was a team I used to coach a while back that had a player on it that did whatever, and I almost removed him from the squad. Right?
Absolutely.
You could have said it like that. That's not that hard. I just came up with it on the fly, right? It's not hard. He didn't. He didn't do it. He basically said, I had this, can't say his name. Okay, so I had this guy, right? Bad timing, bad thing. Also, side note, I don't know why Greg's invited to a leadership summit. I don't know what he's shown anybody that makes you think he should be there. Anyway, I digress. And then I'm just kind of disappointed that we have this potential riff. Because I don't know how it affects a lot of the other players that he was on the squad with. And I know that he's been part of, the United States under 23s and Olympic teams and stuff. And there are lots of other guys coming up. And this is just not what we need. So, for media who are not just trying to be black and white and are trying to paint their little pictures and say whatever, like, that's a shame. But that's it. That's my final statement on Reyna before we move on. What are your final thoughts?
I mean, I think I would echo what you said. It's disappointment from Gio that he acted this way. It's disappointment from Greg that he initiated it that way. Yes, if they actually handled it the way he said he handled it, they did a good job of it during the period that it happened. That's fine. I was disappointed that he would bring it up, especially so soon after the tournament when it's still on everybody's mind. It's easy to put the pieces together. The one other thing that I do want to say, I hinted at it earlier, is I hear a lot of people saying, Gio, good that Greg taught him this lesson. He really wouldn't have changed the outcome of our tournament very much. And I agree with that for the most part, the way that we went. Like, if he had played more against Iran or the Netherlands, it doesn't change much. If he had played the second half of that England game, we are suddenly much more dangerous and much more likely to score a goal. If we beat England, we win the group. Mm-hmm. If we win the group, we go play Senegal instead of the Netherlands. I have very little doubt that we would beat and handle Senegal. No trouble. Yes, then we play France, and I have zero.
Yeah, given what we've seen now.
Given what we've seen now,
yeah.
that is still us making the quarterfinals instead of the round of 16.
100%.
So I believe it did affect our tournament.